Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Uncensored. I'm Ann Kelly.
And I am Sue Marriott, and we are super happy that you hit play and that you're joining us today. Before we get going, we've got a great episode for you today, as always, right? Um, Wanted to do a quick shout out to our online community. We are in a mode of listening, and we sent out a survey. And we just really are soliciting your thoughts and your ideas. We are building our community and we are building programming for our online community. And this is it's a great time to join therapistsuncensored.com/join. But also, if you are already a part of it, look for the survey or just let us know. Send us an email. We actually, you can also email Laura at therapistsuncensored.com. It's LARA at therapistsuncensored.com. So please uncensor yourself. Speak up. This is a great time. It's kind of a blank slate. We've got lots of good ideas that might be happening. So we want to hear from you and what you would like to see. All right, Anne, let's do it.
Let's talk about invulnerability today.
Juicy.
We did a recent episode with Liz Plank talking about the Barbie movie. And in there, we talked about toxic masculinity. Of course,
we got hassled for that a little bit, didn't we?
We did. Well, but part of that conversation we mentioned, and you and I have really been turning more toward the concept of toxic invulnerability. And I want to dive more deeply into that because let's move it out of a gender issue. We want to join. This isn't all about masculinity on any level, right? It's kind of a cultural phenomena in a way that is, promoting in so many different ways invulnerability in us as humans.
Right. It's not about gender, and it's also not about just kind of the old kind of trope of the avoidant personality or something like that.
Right.
We want to talk about it in a more nuanced way for sure.
And it's very hip. Of course, this isn't new, right? It's very hip to talk about vulnerability and how important it is. And thank you, Brene Brown,
Right.
for that. I mean, it's
kind
very
of a brand. Yeah.
Yes, it is our brand. We've said it more times, that how important it is and how happy we are that it's become more of an important topic out there. But it's not
can I just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
Her, I always think of her herding cats, and that what she's speaking of is so deeply, deeply true around two things: moving towards vulnerability for all the reasons that her research shows to do that, and then also addressing shame, which stops us from moving towards vulnerability. And I think she's been a real champion at that. And one thing that I feel like that some of this work adds to that work is some of the unconscious processes that prevent us from doing that. So it feels like it's related, but also, I don't know, it feels like it can extend that work. So those of you that have been, there's wonderful workbooks and, study groups and things like that on the Brene Brown work. I hope that this can just kind of continue that.
No, that's a really good point. And it's harder to really dive into that shame and recognize it and to recognize our own blocks to vulnerability than we think, right? Like there's so much unconsciousness to it and there's so much promoted in our society that activates
right.
us.
Well, we think that we're good at it, I think.
Right.
It's very easy for us to talk about other people's invulnerability but we don't even, let's try to think of real world. We don't think that person's being invulnerable.
Right. We say that person's being obnoxious.
Right.
Or a know-it-all.
Or defended, or stubborn.
Right.
And go ahead, as you're listening, go ahead and fill in the, what your words are. And let's try on can we substitute those words for invulnerability? I'm not quite sure. We can play with this today.
Yeah. What represents invulnerability? Because sometimes the more obvious signs of invulnerability that we've even talked about on the podcast are having a difficult time expressing your emotions, difficult time asking for help, kind of being in that uber independent place. But there's other ways of invulnerability, right? There's the idea that we can't set a boundary, right? That actually, there's a lot of subtle signs of invulnerability. If I set a boundary with somebody and they reject me, or if they go away and I can't tolerate that vulnerability, we develop patterns around blocking our vulnerability
So wait, so
that we
you're
don't even know we
saying,
have.
right? So you're saying if you have difficulty setting boundaries, and so because you're worried about the other person's reaction, and so then you're fuzzy with your boundaries, that's a version of invulnerability
Right.
because it's more vulnerable to set the boundary than it is to not set the boundary and be blurry. That's
Mhm.
interesting. Okay, but wait, let's study that for a second, can we?
Okay, let's do it.
Because I'm thinking about, like, okay, so let's say I get defensive. Is me being defensive, not that I ever do.
Ever.
Let's be clear. But let's say I get defensive, theoretically. Um, does that mean I'm being invulnerable?
I think that's a great question.
Because I don't think it does.
I don't think it's that
As a
black
matter
and
of fact,
white.
it means that I'm probably feeling vulnerable.
Yeah, but I think the concept of letting yourself feel vulnerable is different than, I think that's the struggle, right?
I think you're
It's whether
totally
we
right.
allow ourselves to feel the vulnerability, right? If you get really defensive, I agree with you. When All right, so I'll acknowledge that I get defensive sometimes, every once in a while. um, but in our defensiveness, it's likely that we're experiencing a sense of vulnerability and it becomes intolerable to feel it. And so we can pop into our defended self to say, well, that's not actually true, without actually acknowledging the vulnerability of what if it is, or even if it is, right? Then,
Okay, so maybe this. So feeling defensive is is actually vulnerable, right? Like,
mhm,
but the action of being defensive and of staying in a defensive state is where that we kind of are choosing to, like, are turning away from vulnerability and staying in a more defended place. Like armoring up is then when we're moving towards invulnerability. Is that, would you
right.
say that?
That's how I think that is a way to really conceptualize it. So it was a really good
So it
summary.
goes from like a feeling of vulnerability, and so then therefore I'm either maybe avoiding or maybe I'm getting preoccupied, um, but then the action of it, and then just kind of going with it, and the behaviors that come from that, then I'm moving into a place of less vulnerability and what we're calling now invulnerability, and maybe we can
Mhm.
distinguish between invulnerability and then toxic invulnerability.
Right, because we're all going to fall into invulnerability, right? I mean, we're not going to walk around in this vulnerable state and being able to be self-reflective and aware,
I
right?
was just thinking of like that Pillsbury Dough's boy, or the Michelin Man, or something like some sort of like mushy character. We wouldn't want that.
Absolutely not. But the idea of it being toxic, I mean, that's a whole realm of dialogue, isn't it? How is it toxic to us individually? How is it toxic to our relationships? And then how is it toxic to our culture, or to our community? And I would say all three levels, it really is. And for me, when I think about the concept of being toxic, it's toxic for the individual. Let's talk about that first, right?
But
Because
when
if
does it go from just invulnerability to where it begins to be? And again, let's think of toxic, like poisonous, bad for, um, rigid.
Well, that's rigid's a good one, right? I think where it runs into toxicity is when it becomes more an embedded place that we live, right? Like we're all going to visit there, right? We're not going to walk around in our defended, like I'm not going to be vulnerable in this moment place. And then hopefully we can move when we come down to a place of reflection.
Right, and that's by design, and that's to
Right.
protect us. But I
Right.
think we're talking about getting stuck someplace.
Right, where we get stuck in like more entrenched patterns of invulnerability that then become more of our way of life, and often unconscious. Brene Brown often talks about perfectionism, right? You don't think about perfectionism as being around invulnerability, but it is. If I have to be perfect and really good at what I do, and that can look wonderful to everyone around you because you're so good at it, right? Whatever that is. But when it becomes a threat to not be in a perfectionistic state, right? When we don't recognize that, I think that we're in a defensive posture, that our nervous system is running in a defensive posture, then that's where it can become toxic. It becomes, I guess, like we can be even literal when we talk about toxic to our body, right? Like our body knows, we talk about this a lot, right? Our body knows that we need one another, that we're interconnected. And
Yeah, that's part
so,
of why it scares us so badly to be disconnected
very true. And
and to be
and so
close, both. It's terrifying. People are scary. Let's be honest.
ah, you
We
scare
don't
me.
need we don't need Halloween.
Oh my gosh. Well, I guess when we talk about it related to masculinity, that's really the concept. And people often mistake the concept of toxic masculinity as we're saying that to be masculine is toxic or men are toxic, and it's the opposite of that, right? It's like the promotion of men need to be strong, and that society for a long time says they shouldn't have any weakness, and that they should be uber independent. They should be the Clint Eastwoods of I don't need anybody. And specifically, it's toxic for their body because our body is smarter. Our body and brain are smarter uh, than our, I guess, cultural learnings, and we know we need each other. So how it becomes toxic is that if I cut off that awareness, my body still knows I need other people. And so instead we stay in a kind of chronic state of threat underneath the
Mhm.
surface. Our body does.
Yeah, so another way it becomes toxic is so people that are raised as boys and men, especially those that are raised with more traditional gender roles, are more likely, one, like you're saying, to internalize some of these different power differences, but also they're more likely to be in physical fights with one another, with other men,
Mhm.
and also to engage in physical violence with women or people who identify as women. So it's when you talk about toxicity, it's like literally toxic
Right. It's literally toxic for them individually, for their relationships, and
relationally
then of
and then
course then as
culturally.
and we and so it's, I think it's such a caring thing to talk about toxic masculinity is the opposite of what it sounds. But I do think that it's important, and we both have agreed to this, like we want to get it out of the gender dialogue because it ends up hiding the really robust, important aspects of it when we say masculinity. It's toxic
Well,
and
it sounds
vulnerability.
blaming too,
Oh, it
right?
does. Yeah.
Right? That toxic invulnerability hurts men as much as it hurts women, and
Absolutely.
it disempowers them. It entraps them
Mhm.
as much as it does women. Um,
Mhm.
so, right, getting gender out of this idea of you're either, yeah, you're either on the bus of working towards mutuality and relationality, or you aren't, and you're
Right.
armored up, and you're, on the armored, you know, what are those called? The tank, um,
Mhm.
the Hummer. That's what I was thinking. You're on the Hummer of self protection
Right.
and that the invulnerability.
Mhm. That's a great way to say
And
it.
and it
And
doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter your political orientation, it doesn't matter your
right.
age. It's more about that stance than it is about any of those other groupings. Is that what you're kind of?
Exactly. Exactly. And we want to broaden it because it's not just men that are getting this message. I think that's a really core important point. In fact, you could think with all the dialogue around how important vulnerability would be and to not send that message, that would be an easy, an easier adjustment, right? That happens for all of us, right? We learn something's unhealthy for us and we stop doing it, all of us, right? So
No.
obviously not. And as a society, neither do we do. But we're also, if we think about the culture that is current, right? The force of social media, I think of that, the force of news and politicians, and how there is still such a deep embedded sense of keeping us in a state of fear around vulnerability. If we are vulnerable, we're going to be taken advantage of. Um, we have people who promote kind of laughing at one another. Politicians will laugh at other politicians' weaknesses, and we're sending that as a message to our culture that that's okay, right? If we solidify that, I really think about the impact of social media, though, right? And I want to dive into a little bit of that in terms of how much social media emphasizes our presentation, and how we come across, how we should come across, and how we can perfect our image by working on it over and over and over again to be able to send out to say, this is who I am.
So say more. What are you
Well,
getting at there?
I think probably everybody's had this experience of watching. It's not just the younger population. I think it's grown dramatically, but like ending up taking picture after picture after picture of themselves to get just the right one,
Mm.
right? And to put out on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And we could see that as about that individual and about it being sort of painful that they need that perfect image. But if you stop to think about what social media represents, it is to capture that sense of the best look, of the most seductive, the this is who I am. And how much that impacts that individual and everybody that gets those images and the pressure that it puts. There's a lot of pressure on individuals, especially our young individuals, to present themselves in a way that's almost invulnerable.
Okay, so story time.
Okay,
Is
let's
that
do it.
okay?
Yeah.
And first, I want to say how much I'm on the Beyonce boat, and how much I'm a huge fan, such a huge fan that we schlepped to Houston and saw the concert and loved it, all those things. But this was important, like journey that I took.
Mm-hmm.
So we got there. There were tons of people, and there was a lot of folks that were, doing the thing where that you are holding the phone out and taking 30 pictures, and I guess we're a little bit out of touch. So that was a little bit, we noticed it, and the people
Uh-huh.
sitting in front of us are taking the pictures of themselves as we're waiting. But then the concert starts, and they're continuing to take pictures of themselves or video themselves watching the concert.
Right.
So tracking all this is interesting. It's not judgment. It's more of like, kind of like what you're saying, like, what does this mean? What's happening? Then I noticed in the concert that it almost was like I was listening to an album. It was so produced. And then I thought, do you remember the big screens, right? The screens,
Mm-hmm.
it was the most amazing video production that was going on above. So
Mm-hmm.
much so that your eyes were constantly on the screen. You hardly, you couldn't hardly see the dancers and stuff. So your eyes would pop up to the screen. And I think you and I both said this, that we found ourselves sort of watching the screen even when we wanted to look down and watch the actual concert. And so then I noticed that as she's singing and dancing and being her amazing, incredible self, that she's also sort of playing to the video, because the video is projecting so that all of us can see her. So then
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of all these people that are, I mean, she's a goddess to
Mm-hmm.
these young women. But you see what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? It was like this
Yeah.
echo of echo of echo. And
Mm-hmm.
it was very, I didn't know what to make of it, but it's just sort of, that's the story that popped to mind about this. I don't know. So how does that relate to toxic vulnerability, I guess? Like, help me
Well,
make
if we
sense of that.
think about it first just as invulnerable, and we'll leave the word toxic aside for just a
Yeah, that's
second,
good. That's good.
right? It feels like the image, and I left with the same feeling, is that the image of what was happening, the capturing it for the future in such an amazingly perfect way, ended up being sort of the priority. So the connection to the audience, we left feeling like, wait, I missed feeling the connection,
And you're
right?
totally right. Because as we walked out, I did notice, like, sometimes when you leave a concert, you're just like pumped up, and you're high fiving all the strangers around you, and you're just like talking, you're processing it. And I did notice as we walked out, it was like everybody was quiet, and wasn't bad. Everybody would have said it was a great concert, and they
It was a
did.
great
And it
concert.
was a great concert.
It was.
But there was something, like,
Her
I think we all left with an admiration for this beautiful, talented woman, but
Yes.
not necessarily feeling close to her or that we knew her.
Right.
I did. I felt like I knew her less, and she was in her hometown, Houston, Texas. I felt
Yeah.
like I knew her less after the show than I did before the show, and then I felt less connected to like that. I wanted to be fangirl. You know what I mean? I wanted to be
Yeah.
like screaming, ah!
Because you
um,
are a fangirl.
I
You
am,
know
and
what's
I
so funny?
yes.
Let's bring it into the active moment of vulnerability right now.
Okay, good.
So, as we're talking about it, we are talking to an audience probably of a lot of people who love Beyonce, maybe, and who were at that concert because there were so many people at that concert. And I'm like,
Yeah.
imagine feeling the vulnerability of the responses we're going to get in saying anything negative about that concert, right? And so,
It's true.
right, and we probably will. It's okay. We're open
We
to that.
love her. Is that not clear?
Yeah, but
Love,
but
love.
here it's
Hey,
so true.
as middle aged, as sassy middle aged people, I'm calling us middle aged, as sassy middle aged women, we are. You know, we go to these rock concerts. We are cool. We love Beyonce. Okay, I'm defending
Okay,
myself. See, I'm defending myself.
right. Well, I
I was
mean, but
getting
I
activated.
right, but I could feel my and I think this is what we all experience. This isn't those people over there experiencing the impact of social media. This is us. We all experience it. We're
Oh,
with you.
right. So you were anticipating getting negative review and negative
Yes.
message, right? Well, and then
Right.
you just saying it, then I was defending myself.
Right. And so this is the live action of invulnerability, right? This is how social
Exactly.
media impacts all of us. Like,
That's
okay, so
true.
we are going to be our authentic self. This is therapist uncensored. So we are going to just talk about this and really kind of be in the muck with everybody, right? That's what we want. But in doing so, we can feel our own vulnerability of, oh, because in social media, one of the things, well, just social, there's,
It's
I think the,
immediate.
right, the things that really can impact us besides just, okay, here's our image going out, it needs to be perfected, it kind of lives, is that because it's non-relational, right? We're not having a direct relationship with the individuals. We can do all sorts of things that can create that can be about social rejection, which is dangerous for our bodies, right? Like I get that if people unfollow us, it's not actually literally dangerous to us, right?
Well, but it can
But
hurt.
but
Well,
it can hurt.
it particularly hurts if they tell us that they're unfollowing. You know, if you're going to unfollow, just unfollow. But if you have to announce that you're unfollowing, it's like getting the finger as you're, driving or
As you're
something.
at the
It's
door.
like, it's
But
okay.
the experience of knowing that you can get an immediate, quick judgment, critique, and rejection and cut off, right? Like the cutoff from social media is so easy. And our ability to judge one another on social media is so easy because, what's judgment about, right? Judgment is an activation inside of us that often is about self protection, right? Like, I don't like the part of me you're bringing out. So I'm going to judge you even more harshly so I don't have to feel it. I'm oversimplifying it, but I just was like thinking, oh my gosh, like every time we are out there in any public forum, we are open to rejection. Well, that's exactly what 20-year-olds feel,
That's
right?
right. Oh,
On
that's really empathic. I really like what you're saying.
right, like how many likes, how many, and had the vulnerability of that, and it's there. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of positive about social media. This isn't an anti-social
No, I
media
don't. I don't
podcast,
think it's coming across that way at all. I think that that's right. And stop me if this takes us off. But like I was thinking when you were saying, it's not you're not in relationship.
right?
That there's that new neuroscience article about even Zoom when you're zooming with someone, even if it's a one-on-one thing, that the social emotional parts of your brain don't light up in the same way as it does when you light up when you are live, when you're sharing molecules. That's not really a surprise, but
Right.
but social media is, removed even from, I mean, much removed even from that, because yeah, I mean, even just the image of the camera turned towards oneself
Mm-hmm.
for an audience, for an unknown audience, that
Mm-hmm.
is ready to like, not like, to, and you're
Mm-hmm.
ready to count the likes, and
Mm-hmm.
it makes me cringe. It's
And
painful. It's
and
vulnerable.
it is so vulnerable. And where I think it becomes toxic for our culture is if we don't have our own awareness of it, our own ability to to ground ourselves, like you were saying, without the full social emotional capacity inside our brain being activated, then we don't have that part of us that it can be compassionate and connecting and understanding of the other person. And instead, we can quickly cut and not actually even feel or imagine feeling the impact on the other person.
Yeah.
right? Like we can just do an active rejection or
Oh,
a
I see what
snippy
you're saying.
response.
I see what you're saying. 'Cause the other side being true too. So the person putting it out there is there. That's one half of it, but then the other half is it's also it's much um, the invulnerability of the thumbs down or the snarky
Right.
comment or the really cruel comment that you're much more likely to do that over social media than you are otherwise, and how harmful that
Hmm.
is. And that's where it gets into toxic versus just,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, it's toxic for the individuals because we're not actually needing to be even culpable for our own impact on other people, right? And we don't have to be, and we're being drawn out so much when we're thinking about like a whole generation's being brought up with this, right? Like how hard it is and how challenging it must be. And I still find it incredibly challenging. And I had a whole, since you said we were middle aged, we had a lot of life before social media existed. But the powerful nature of how hard it is to get inside of ourselves anyway, to really know ourselves, to really go more deeply and not think about how other people think of us and get to know our mistakes and our weaknesses and our strengths. I mean, that's just a challenge anyway. But when you're brought up on this constant feedback loop and threat system, it really makes it harder to go deep into your own vulnerabilities and get to know them, right? Like
Yeah, to kind of
it's
develop that
yes,
capacity to be able to feel discomfort, to be able
right.
to feel discomfort and stay engaged and to stay socially engaged, which is kind
Mhm.
of the way that we describe secure relating, or kind of that staying in the green zone of relating, which
Right.
is um, that's interesting. Um, yeah, so going back to the idea of toxic vulnerability.
Toxic invulnerability.
Oh god, that's a great slip, I think. Scary vulnerability. How about we call it that? Um, but the valuable vulnerability, the
Yes.
so that's what we're swimming towards is feeling vulnerability and recognizing it as not toxic, like I just said, but that is something desirable and something to be proud of and something very adult and something. I hate the
Mhm.
idea of being manly, right? That's such a
Mhm.
gendered thing, but really sexy manliness is being able to
Mhm.
be vulnerable and being able to feel your
Mhm.
feelings and express yourself. Um,
Mhm.
so really changing the cultural notion of that.
Right.
Yeah, whereas stoicism and being zipped up and not
Mhm.
speaking or just letting ourselves be too anxious and acting on that and acting on that and acting on that, and everybody else has to deal with our anxiety. And as we make noise about our anxiety, is another version of this invulnerability.
I'm really glad you brought that up because it's one of the things I wanted to for sure go more deeply in is what are these signs of invulnerability we don't recognize, because we often speak about the stoicism and the uber independence. We've done a lot on that and kind of flipping it over to the other side. Um, when I guess another maybe example that pops up is, let's say, the vulnerability of our kids and our kids struggling or something going wrong, et cetera. And so we have to fix it, fix it, fix it. There is a message that we're sending to them and within us that says having a problem is not okay. Feeling that sense of insecurity with your friends at school is not okay, yet it's the norm. It's important for them to go through that. And then our own vulnerability that we're avoiding by trying to fix it and trying to stay in that hyperactive state is a state of invulnerability. It's not as easy to recognize it as the stoicism, but it is. It's I can't live with the discomfort inside of me that makes me feel weak or scared if I see my kids suffering. And literally sitting with that vulnerability is really, really hard. So we have all these strategies to avoid it, don't we? That we don't even recognize as strategies
Yeah,
to live in our
I'm so
defense.
mad at you right now for God. Like that's just a gut one right there. And and so true. And
Yeah.
I think that what we're talking about is and I love the parenting example. I mean, for the parents out there who can't relate to
Hmm.
giving into our own anxiety and our own needs at the expense of our kids. That's certainly
Hmm.
so relatable. But also, like, I want to hold the idea of toxic lightly
Hmm.
because we're not just trying to point out what's wrong or what we're
Yes.
doing wrong. It's not like, oh, that's, that's this and that's this at all. I think what we're really trying to do is, like, we won't call it toxic until it's like extreme, extreme,
Yes.
extreme. And it's when you refuse to do anything about it, and when it's rigidifies, and when
Right.
it's and like you said earlier, Anne, you said entrenched, when it's
Mhm.
like that over there, I'm pushing my hands away. That over there is what we mean by toxic. The
Mhm.
invulnerability part is natural, and it is part
Right.
of our defensive structure. And so we don't want you, as you're hearing this, to hear it as sort of name calling or as
Mhm.
problematic. It's more of like, we want it to evoke curiosity and openness. And like, so as you can feel yourself, like even when you mention the parenting, oh, it really did. It's just gutting. Um,
Mhm.
and, you know, and again, if you just, any of you thinking, if you can think of your child or your pet or, your
Mhm.
beloved, whoever your beloved is, and something happening to them, it gets right around, that's when we need our defenses. And that's when we need,
Absolutely.
so the idea, what Anne's challenging us to do is, in that most vulnerable place, to be able to stand in and still, even when we're imagining that, needing to do the right thing, staying engaged, even with our fear and our
Mhm.
anxieties, in that most vulnerable state, that is what
Mhm.
we're cultivating. It's hard work. It's very difficult, and
Mhm.
it is the right thing. And it's about staying engaged and staying connected to yourself, and doing the better thing, which is, rather than just
Mhm.
kind of the lazy, or I hate to use that word, it's the, but
I take the word out of it's not the lazy, it's the more automated.
the
It's not
automated
lazy, it's automated.
the
It's
automated
more
reactivity, right?
right.
Right. That is
Right.
more
It's just
that can be more self-serving.
right. And so yeah, I love the way you put it because toxicity is about really being allowing it to be unrecognized and just entrenched. And
Well,
if we
not a lot, like refusing to recognize it.
oh, that's a good way to reframe it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Well,
do you
and the
think?
refusal is often not conscious. I mean, that's also really important. We're not going, I will not recognize my vulnerability. It's unconscious, right? We have to slow down and feel the discomfort inside of us to recognize that.
But let me
And
ask you this: if it's
okay.
unconscious, if somebody's really, truly not aware,
Mm-hmm.
somebody has been programmed by culture to be the one to know,
Mm-hmm.
and be the one to be turned to. I'm thinking, or like being the helper, and just so automatically helps. And but it's often, for not for the other person. It's because it's so that I can feel like a good helper, and it's
Mm-hmm.
unconscious. Is that
Mm-hmm.
necessarily toxic? To me, I guess I was thinking of it that, like, if somebody, it, I mean, I don't know. Is it?
I think, well, in that example, and again, we're using the word toxic, and that's a powerful word, right? Poisonous.
That's why I think I was wanting to preserve it
Yeah.
for people who refuse to change it.
Well, I'm going to challenge you on that because
Okay.
going back to toxic's extreme way to put it, we need maybe a lesser word, but if I'm jumping in because I can't handle the vulnerability that I feel if I see, let's say my kid feels insecure and really struggling. And if I'm not aware of my own difficulty with that, I may jump in continuously to either fix it or, let's say, for instance, let's say our child is feeling insecure with his friendship network at school and comes home and saying, they're rejecting me or I don't feel part of things and things like that, by the way, everybody feels, right? If I'm not recognizing my own activation by that, I might try to move my child away from those feelings either by, well, they don't know what they're, by either discounting and putting down the kid, the peers, or disregarding their struggle. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Everybody feels that way. There's a lot of different ways that it can then strip our child from going through their own difficulties and knowing that those insecurities are natural and allowing our children to feel our insecurities and being with them in there.
So
Right.
can we call it?
Otherwise,
So can we call it harmful invulnerability?
impactful. Yeah. Like, I don't want to say that that's toxic. I do every bit of what I just said. I can do. Like, there's no part of me thinking I walk around as a toxic parent, but I do think that we're not calling anybody toxic. We're saying that the emphasis on invulnerability can be toxic. This isn't about any personal person. It's that if we believe that we shouldn't have weaknesses or insecurities, and we continue to perpetuate that, because really what's toxic is our society, our global society, sending the message that um, to have weakness, to be messy, you need to
Mm-hmm.
fix it, something's wrong. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't if you don't do your best, like that whole idea of just do your best, be the best at whatever. It sends this message of comparison, right? Like, oh, well, did I do my best? Or it sends I should be better than, rather than helping as a culture, as a community, helping us feel safer going inside and just being okay that we're going to have messiness. And we also have strengths. And that's all part of all of us, because our goal is for secure relating with ourselves, but with other people. And if we're not recognizing our own focus on invulnerability, then we're losing the way we can more authentically connect to people. So if we think of vulnerability about authenticity, right? Because I think some people think of vulnerability as I can cry in front of other people or I can't. And we can be an emotional mess and still be invulnerable, right? It is that just because we cry does not mean that we are, we could be crying for ourselves. I mean, I don't want to get into those details, but I think our, the message is authenticity. Can we be our authentic selves, right? We get back to those pictures, right? Like, if I'm being pulled towards, the most important thing is the image that I'm giving. The most important thing is to show that I'm the sexiest or whatever it is in these images. And if I'm able to do that, then I'm going to get acceptance and belonging and feel part of things. But if I show my authentic self who says something stupid or as a, then I'm going to be open for rejection and a quick cutoff. Like the cutoff of social media is, I think, one of the most devastating things right now that I can see hitting all of us, right? I'm like, oh, how many people are going to like because we said something about a Beyonce concert, right? Like, but our challenge, I think, is to be able to be our authentic selves. And the desire is like, if we can find our authentic connected selves and really acknowledge our weaknesses as part of us and not just to be fixed, and our vulnerability, we're focusing on that our authentic self is about belonging, not our perfect self, that our real messy selves, when research shows that when we connect and are more vulnerable, authentic selves and other people accept us, the areas of our mind and our brain that get activated are much more focused on social connection. And then lovingly, it brings out that in other people. Then other people can feel vulnerable and be their authentic self. So I think the dialogue is about how to get authentic, how to be real and accept that, and to really promote going inside oneself instead of the outward image. And that's a challenge right now, I think.
Well, I think that's great. I think that was really well said, and I think, yeah, I don't want to get lost in the what's toxic or toxic as name calling. I think
Yeah,
just
I
to
agree.
take a couple steps back, I think the bigger thing is that this isn't about, like you just said, that it's not about an individual.
Right.
It's not name calling. It's not about a gender at all. That toxic invulnerability is about the act of an authenticity and staying out of connection and relationship. And I want to say, kind of refusing to move into a more mutual
Yeah.
relational space. That's the
Right.
way that I'm thinking of it, and we can all think of it a little bit differently. So that's kind of the bigger picture. And then I think that we also then dove into the more intrasight, individual picture of like, what does that look like
Mhm.
for us, each of us individually. And then I was also thinking about, so the young people that are taking, and our young people, some of our young people are included in that, right? Around
For
taking,
sure.
so it's like, this is all of us, of
Mhm.
taking the 30 pictures. It's like, I was thinking about those young people at the concert. It's like, there's no way to walk up to them and be like, "Oh no, you don't have to do that. You're good. You're already good." You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that would be out of relationship with them, I think. So
Right,
it's
because
not,
part of what they could be capturing, the argument could be on their place. They want this is like an amazing experience that they get to be in the presence of this incredible performer. And so they're capturing something for themselves that they can hold it. And that would be really
but why the
wonderful.
30 times?
That's what I'm saying. Well, it wasn't just 30. It was honestly, I mean, fortunately, there's a not. I mean, it's honestly, it was the entire concert. I don't know that I saw much of being able to just go in, like, this sounds, let me step away from that because I have no idea what their internal experience is. There, I have no idea. But from the feeling about being able to get inside oneself and be in oneself, I think that's going to be really hard to do with a camera pointed at you
Yeah.
and the images being taken. It just is a challenge. And we
Hmm.
could, I mean, I'm open for arguments. So some people may be doing that and feel very enlivened in themselves. For me, it felt like more about it wasn't in the moment. And our challenge in an authentic self is to be able to find our internal selves while with others, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it was even interesting at that concert because it was really hard to see her
Yeah.
because actually her image was quite dark because the lighting
Yeah. I
was
know.
set
That was my
up.
point.
I
Yeah.
mean, we didn't have great seats, so we were really far back. But the situation was, it was the image that she was really, the way that the image was done, it was, she was so dark except for the reflection, and there was something, we talked a lot about that, didn't we? It was something about that we're going to capture this moment for a later date, right? And
Yeah.
that
And
that
that's what
seems,
you're talking about.
yes,
Right.
because
Right.
if we are focused
It's
on,
an as if instead
that's a
of
good
being
way
in
to
the
put it.
moment. It's as
Yeah.
if.
Yeah. And it's a
I mean, just to stick with the concert stuff, this is in
right.
contrast to Lizzo. Yes, everyone be impressed how cool I am. Um, but that in the Lizzo concert, there was I was really struck by, like, she literally stopped and turned on the house lights and went around all the upper sections and, like, you there in the pink top, let me see you
Mm-mm.
like, on every single section she went
Yeah.
and she said, I see you, I see you, I see you. And that was such an amazing experience. And I can tell you on that one, you're walking out talking to strangers, and you're part of an experience. And again, not better, worse, but there's something about, like, being with, uh, and then in the immediacy of the moment. So I don't know if that adds to what
No,
we're
I
saying
think
or
it
not,
does
but
because I think that's, I mean, if we get to kind of what now, like what are, from a secure relating place, what we're wanting to talk about, or what we are talking about, is the invulnerability and how that plays into us not being like living, to put it in those framework, what part of us is living our more protected defensive positions and we don't know it, because
yeah,
if we are not in ourselves and connected, right, if we then we need to check out, are we in our more defensive selves unconsciously? Because if we're in our perfected, our presentation selves, we're not in our authentic self,
yeah,
right? So to really be in our more
going
connected,
inside, yeah,
yeah,
going
yeah, I think
inside.
you're right on target. Being in our more connected selves, we have to be sort of aware, right? Like when I was all of a sudden preoccupied with, oh my gosh, we're saying something negative about Beyonce, I left the conversation for a minute, right?
Hmm.
I was like, oh my God, should we be? And then I'm like, you know what? We're speaking authentically and we just have to keep doing that and trusting our audience out there. They get to have thoughts and feelings and opinions and we want to hear them, but can they be expressed in relation? Right? Like,
Well, and how
write
you
us an
can
email and talk to us about what you think instead of let me drop and run. Like, I think the drop and run of social
it's
media,
scary.
well, and I'm going to go even beyond that. Like, I think it's not good for our culture. It's not
Hmm.
only, so if we think about the toxicity of the individual, but also of our relationships, how do we, if
Cancel
we,
culture.
cancel culture is so powerful. Like dating, I was talking to somebody really recently about their experience, um, about the dating sites and how hard it is, like the flip left and the flip right. How quick? What is that based on? Is it based on a profile that says I'm the funniest, I'm the smartest, I can, or is it based on sort of an authentic connection? And I'm not saying that can't happen there, but the challenge would be, how connected are you to your authentic self? And are you looking for that and welcoming and opening of others that can really be in their authenticity? And I think so. I think that advocating for us to be able to be more comfortable with our vulnerability and authenticity and stay in connection. So when we're relating on social media or we're relating with other people around Thanksgiving table, that um,
We're
that we can
basically
hold
just saying,
ourselves.
that's right. Hold ourselves, being your badass self. The way that you came back into the conversation was you shared what
Yeah,
stopped you. So you went more relational rather than kind of thinking to yourself, we're just going to cut this part, or or trying
yeah,
to signal to me like, no, no, no. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
you stayed with it, and then told me about it, and then shared about it, and then that was beautiful.
Right, because it's going to
It's
happen, right?
it's
We're gonna.
modeling. No, you're modeling kind of what it is we're talking about. So I love this. Um, I appreciate this conversation, Ann Kelly. It's been thought provoking, and I will continue to think about it. And I hope that you all continue to think about, just in general, how to stay inside yourself, in your green zone, authentic, connected, and not to be upset when you begin to drift and get a little bit wound up, but curious and kind of keeping your hands on the steering wheel so you can steer your way back in and be deliberate.
And how to promote that and help support that in other people,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
how
And
to
the best way of
support.
doing that is to do that first
Do it
yourself.
for yourself, show self-compassion.
Yeah.
Like, don't look for perfection in self, show self-compassion. But also, we're going into some really complex seasons of elections, et cetera. I'm not bringing it into, but just like, don't look for that in other people. Don't, like, really listen to what it is important to you and go for that, and not in this, like, let's not join in the disconnected, quick, judgmental over there, kind of perspective.
Well, even I think, just to kind of wrap, the going back and calling up those young people that we're talking about with the phones, right? So rather than standing back and looking at
Yeah.
them, right? It's or like, you really should put your phone down and watch the concert. Like, that isn't at all kind of what was happening, I don't think.
Mm-mm, mm-mm,
I mean, maybe that was happening some, but that's not where I want to land. Where it's more
mm-hmm,
of like, I really wanted to understand, and I think that I did more deeply, that the concert that they're watching, that was what their hero was doing,
mm-hmm.
and that their hero was doing that because that's what the culture community wants the hero to do. You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly.
it's this never ending circle, and so
Right.
empathize, like understanding the, whatever it is that you're seeing that you don't understand, that person is doing that for a really good reason
Mm-hmm.
that makes a lot of sense to them in that moment, even if it's a symptom of something. And we don't have to understand it all, but seeing them as embedded in, there's a whole history that led up to whatever that moment is, and there's a whole future that none of us know about, for that person, and just keeping that humility and that kindness and that love and compassion for them as
Mm-hmm.
well.
And then, just going to add one other thing, and that is also to look for how you are also represented in that, in what ways you can relate, because
That's right.
we very
Our
much are.
version of that.
We each have our own version of that, right? So it's especially
Totally.
generationally, it's very easy to sit and go, that generation back then, which was, but like, I think that, look for your own version, because that way you're connecting to with the aspect of, I get it, and you're connected to your own struggles with things, and it
Mhm.
allows whatever goes forward from that, it's going to be more relatable and a
That's
more
right.
secure position.
We're all human. There's almost nothing out there that, if you look hard enough, you can't find your version of.
It's
So,
true. It's true. All right.
well, thanks for
Thank
listening, you guys. We really appreciate it, and appreciate you hanging all the way in. Again, invite you to join our online community. It's a great time to do that. Therapistsuncensored.com/join.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you around the bend.